Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My task is to talk for a while about some of the ethical challenges that have been mentioned in John's opening remarks, and to sort of set the scene of what the Chartered Institute of Public Relations is doing to try and improve the general culture as well as working to change the law. So it might seem obvious that lobbying should be transparent and obvious, but it's evident from the never-ending scandals our current political system throws up month after month that it isn't. Some people who lobby are still partying like it's 1999, and some politicians, while they may not actually be pocketing brown paper envelopes as they were back in the days of the major government, clearly still feel entitled to have their palms crossed with silver in return for delivering favours. Prime ministers have tutted and wrung their hands over this for many years, and from time to time, some guilty individual has been marched off in disgrace when their misdeeds have come to light. Despite this, we live for now in a system in which dirty money continues to course through the veins of the body politic. Huge public contracts are given out through a backdoor VIP lane for party donors, and ministers play hide and seek with their declarations and disclosures to ensure that any potentially embarrassing conversations only come to light long after the event, if at all.
Recording in progress.
Once you pull on the thread of the lack of honesty and transparency in lobbying, you quickly begin to unravel a whole mildewy carpet of unethical and unedifying practices. What starts with secretive briefings and a quiet word leads down the corridors of power to some very shady corners. Organisations such as Transparency International and Spotlight on Corruption work tirelessly to bring the disinfectant of sunlight to these corners. But we should not forget how much we are indebted to the determined work of our best journalists, who bring public attention to some of the instances where lobbyists and politicians, who are in some cases interchangeable, have fallen far short of the standards we expect of those serving us in public life. In my remarks this morning, I'm not going to try and explore all of the bad things that bad lobbying can lead to. I'm just going to concentrate on lobbying itself and what I think we can do to improve it. I'll begin by setting out the commitment of my own organisation, the Chartered Institute of Public Relations. We believe that integrity in communications will make a better connected world. That is why we exist, and that's why we have a charter. Our chartered purpose is to promote for the public benefit high levels of skill, knowledge, competence, and standards of practice and professional conduct on the part of public relations practitioners, and to promote public understanding of the contribution of effective public relations in encouraging ethical communication and in enhancing the efficiency and performance of all sectors of the economy. How do we do this? Some examples. We think that the current law on lobbying fails in its purpose to promote honesty and transparency, and that the statutory lobbying register is not fit for purpose. So we operate our own voluntary register that anybody who lobbies can sign up to. We have twice as many people signed up to our voluntary register as are signed up on the statutory register. We understand how impressionable new MPs may not have much experience of being lobbied or necessarily know what to expect when they are approached by an individual. And so for the last 10 years, we have produced, at our members' expense, an MP's Guide to Good Lobbying, setting out how honest and transparent lobbyists will approach them. The guide also lists warning signs of a bad lobbyist, such as not being clear about who they're representing or trying to push misleading or one-sided information. We send this guide out to the new intake of MPs after each general election. Last year, we worked with Jericho Chambers, Ipsos and other partners on the Business and Democracy Commission to produce a report that explores some of the current sensitivities around the relationship between business and government. This year, we've supported research by the Foreign Policy Centre into how PR agencies are implicated in the affairs of foreign kleptocrats, and how, for example, until recently, the second largest foreign spender on lobbying in the House of Commons was a front organisation for the government of Azerbaijan, which might politely be described as a family business. The report recommends stronger regulation of lobbying as an important means of regaining some control over this deeply troubling area. Lastly, and most importantly for us, there is our Lobbying for Good Lobbying campaign, which is what I want to concentrate on today. We spent 10 years engaging constructively with the Cameron government as it worked to shape the existing Lobbying Act, pointing out why it wouldn't work. We spent more years working with the Registrar of Consultant Lobbyists to support his work to try to get the best out of the law as it stands. But in 2021, which brought us first the Greensill scandal and then the Owen Paterson scandal, this really marked the end of the road for us in terms of trying to get the best out of a hopeless system. In 2022, we launched our campaign, Lobbying for Good Lobbying, which calls for a change in the law to ensure that all lobbying activity, rather than just the work of consultant lobbyists, is recorded and disclosed on a public register. To be clear, we believe business and other organisations should lobby, and we believe politicians should be lobbied. This is natural, sound and good, but it matters enormously how it's done. Last year's Labour Party conference was the largest annual conference ever for a UK political party in terms of attendance, income generated and number of exhibitors. It is estimated that 18,000 people were present. One group that was certainly well represented was lobbyists. With the polls pointing to a Labour victory, groups of businesses and consultants lined the halls, hoping to get their question asked at a fringe event, to convince a minister to take a quick photo at their stand, to secure a 5-minute coffee or, if they're even luckier, a meeting. As we all know, party conferences are only a small part of a lobbying strategy, but those in attendance were rewarded when Chris Bryant MP told a fringe event, "These ears are here for lobbying." The reaction to that line was very interesting. Some people were shocked, an MP actually encouraging people to lobby him. Some were appalled, accusing him of trying to make a quick buck or secure a job for himself after he stands down. Others, sensibly, were pleased, because what he was saying is something that isn't said out loud enough, that part of an MP's job is to be lobbied. It's a sign of a healthy democracy when policymakers listen to expert advice from people with knowledge and experience of a particular sector or a particular policy matter. Lobbying, when done well, should strengthen democracy. Sadly, too often it is seen as doing the opposite. Chris Bryant explains in his book, published last year, Code of Conduct, why we need to fix Parliament and how to do it. He describes lobbying as a quintessential aspect of politics. I would go further and say it's essential for democracy to thrive. That's not to deny the very many problems we have in this country when it comes to the relationship between politics and the outside world. But none of these problems, let's remind ourselves, are new. Bryant's book looks as far back as 1695, when the East India Company budgeted an eye-watering £90,000 in the money of the day to bribe MPs. I don't need to remind you that 300 years on, in the 1990s, we had the Cash for Questions scandal. And following each of these scandals, there's been talk of reform and a busy flurry of reports, but nothing has successfully or in any way meaningfully solved the problem. Indeed, we are so far from a solution that Scott Benton, until recently a Conservative MP, told representatives of what turned out to be a fake company that he could lobby ministers, set up meetings with government advisors, table parliamentary questions, and provide access to confidential documents. He added, possibly untruthfully, that these were common things for an MP to do. And yet, in 2010, before becoming Prime Minister, David Cameron explicitly linked secret corporate lobbying to the public's mistrust in politics. The lobbying industry, he said, has tainted our politics for too long. He added, "We all know how it works. The lunches, the hospitality, the quiet word in your ear. The ex-ministers and ex-advisors for hire, helping big business find the right way to get its way." It was his Conservative-led government that would introduce the Transparency of Lobbying, Non-Party Campaigning and Trade Union Act 2014, which we know, not very affectionately, as the Lobbying Act. It established a new register of lobbyists and the new office of the Registrar of Consultant Lobbying. The Lobbying Act was designed to increase transparency and improve public trust in the institutions of government, but by every measure it has failed. The law as it stands currently only allows for third-party or consultant lobbyists to register. It therefore only captures a tiny percentage, roughly 4%, of all lobbying activity, because anyone lobbying while on the payroll of an organisation, like David Cameron, rather than as a consultant to it, is not permitted to register. A recent report from the Committee of Standards in Public Life concluded that it is too difficult to find out who is lobbying government, information is often released too late, descriptions of the content of government meetings are ambiguous and lack necessary detail. Transparency data is scattered, disparate, and not easily cross-referenced, and information in the public interest is often excluded from data releases completely. Meanwhile, public trust remains low, and examples like Greensill, which was completely legal under the Act, expose how the system requires complete reform. And that is why the CIPR launched our Lobbying for Good Lobbying campaign. We want to see a lobbying register of lobbying activity, not a register of lobbyists. Ethics and standards in public life, or the lack of them, have consistently been in the headlines over the last few years. Last year, the IPPR concluded that a clear majority of people in Britain are dissatisfied with democracy. And Ipsos Mori found trust in government ministers is now lower than it was following the expenses scandal in 2009. Earlier this year, Transparency International found that the UK had fallen to its lowest ever score on its Corruption Perceptions Index. We often talk about the decline in trust, but what does it mean and how does it manifest itself? As far back as the 1960s, political scientists Gabriel Armand and Sidney Vebra wrote that a lack of trust in politics would lead to the destabilisation of democratic political systems. In 2019, Stanley and Dowler, in their paper, The Deep Roots of the Trust Crisis, link low trust with the rise of populism, which threatens established political institutions. The point is picked up again in the Business and Democracy report from Jericho Chambers that I mentioned earlier. This lack of trust has real-world consequences. Businesses feel that there is no longer an open and fully transparent relationship between the public and private sectors, according to Ian Anderson, who's speaking later today, who led an independent review into the government's relations with business late last year. He concludes that business engagement with government requires greater transparency. Many parliamentarians of all parties are fed up with being tainted by association with corruption and dishonesty. Lobbyists themselves welcome change. A recent poll by the CIPR found that 86% want to see greater transparency around who is lobbying Westminster politicians. And the public are, of course, demanding better. Another CIPR poll of 2,000 members of the public found that 2/3 feel the public should know more about the lobbyists seeking to influence MPs and ministers. In an election year, we are all going to pay the collective price of public disgust as people switch off in record numbers or become distracted by misinformation. The antidote to voter apathy and disgruntlement is not more election campaigning that deals in half-truths and distractions. It was no surprise to see that the World Economic Forum's Global Risks Report earlier this year identified misinformation as the most significant short-term threat to society. The case for change is now urgent. We will have a general election this year, and that must be followed by a comprehensive change in the relationship between business, government, and the lobbyists who act as intermediaries between them. The change we are calling for is both a legislative and a cultural one. We need to move away from lobbying being seen as a dark art and an activity that goes on behind closed doors, to one where an MP calls for lobbyists to engage with them, and this is celebrated and welcomed. Last year's Jericho Chambers report points to the prize. If lobbying is transparent and can be accounted for in public, then of course it can be constructive. But business management expert Michael Porter describes how in the USA, money spent on lobbying and campaign contributions has advanced the narrow short-term interests of companies. It has also indulged in a form of politics that rewards partisanship. It fails to address the country's biggest policy challenges and leaves businesses with the cost of filling the gap. A weak public realm stifles business success, while a vibrant democracy brings the rule of law, fair competition, a stable society, an educated and interested workforce, and a coordinated response to crises. In return, business provides the innovation, wealth and security for democracy to flourish and deliver necessary common good outcomes. The CIPR will continue to stand for integrity in communications in the pursuit of a better connected world. Since the Greensill scandal, there has been real energy behind a push for change. The status quo is creaking and sagging under its own weight. Nobody except the current Conservative cabinet thinks the status quo is sustainable. They are wrong. Their ways of working will not endure, and all of us have a vital interest in ensuring that a new politics and a new relationship between business and government, as well as a new culture of lobbying, quickly take root. Now is the time. Thank you.